Artemy Burakh is a man with a lot of titles opposed to the scientifically inclined bachelor and to the spiritual mystic changeling. Some of them he deliberately tries to inherit, whereas some he doesn't want the slightest thing to do with. Each of Artemy's titles carries a unique signifier, a layer of his character. He is the most grounded of the protagonists, living as he does in the muck and blood. Today, I will be mostly talking about the 2019 revision and reframing of the game, Pathologic 2, but I also wanted to include pertinent details from the original game as well throughout. When Artemy gets the letter from his father, he decides not to wait for a train, but to start walking the tracks until he finds a train across the vast, empty steppe in the bitter cold. He is a determined man who will see nothing get in his way and willfully bloodies his own hands to protect that which he cares about. He doesn't care if he is seen as evil, so long as he feels he has done the right thing. Artemy gets his hands dirty at almost every opportunity in the story, often being called on to provide a physical solution to a problem where other characters will not or cannot provide that solution. When playing as him, I saw his presence in the streets as a kind of ruthless altruist, if you will, a doctor who helps people as often as he can, yet one who is unafraid of being rude or of killing, a man who feels in the right place at the wrong time, with an ultimately kind and generous soul. Artemy draws from a wellspring deep within himself to harden the outside of his soul, mind and body enough to survive the terrible events of the game. He's willing to kill those suffering from the plague in order to ensure that a cure is made, even while trying to save as many people as possible. He is the protagonist who decides the fate of two peoples, as his responsibility is split, rather terrifyingly, between the townsfolk and the kin. So, just who is Artemy Burakh? The Haruspex is the most important title Artemy has, the title by which most fans of the game will be able to identify him most readily. Ah yes, the Haruspex. He's the grumpy one who looks after all the kids, right? The one with the pockets filled with human organs? Haruspex is a Latin term dating back to ancient Rome, but the specific practice dates back further to the ancient Babylonians. Here's some etymological stuff, if you're interested. It means one who looks at entrails to divine the will of the gods, basically. A Roman Haruspex was employed by both rich and poorer households quite often in Roman society, and they also interpreted all portents or unusual phenomena of nature, especially thunder and lightning and unusual or monstrous births, and they prescribed the expiatory ceremonies after such events. This formed a most complicated pseudoscience. Pseudoscience, for those who are unaware, refers to things that claim to be scientific but aren't actually compatible with the way we understand science. This is a great framework to think of the way Artemy operates during the events of the game. He's a man with a background in medical science, specifically the field of surgery, but also with the background of folk medicine, the traditional herbal/organ-based medicines of the steppe. Typically, a Roman Haruspex was one who examined not human entrails, but animal entrails. Rather fittingly, the town on Gorkon, where Artemy lives, is rooted in the lives of animals, specifically the bulls, which are slaughtered in the behemoth that is the abattoir, which itself rests in the shadow of the civilizing, symbolic force of the termitary, which has some important relation to Artemy and his struggle, something that I will get back to. So, to become a true Haruspex, Artemy is tested in a variety of ways. In Pathologic 2, separate kin members try to help Artemy become Menku. These range from Aspides' aid at the beginning of the game to help from the Odong/worms throughout. And who can forget having to fight the dissenters in the termitary at the end of the game, or plunging into the bowels of the earth. It is important to note that these are mostly issued by random members of the kin, and shape what the future of the kin will be like. In the original, the kin's tests are directly issued by a more antagonistic form in Oyen, in a series of trials that challenge your resources and your skills. Both times, Artemy has to go through mental and physical traumas to receive the respect that the hard religion and culture of the kin need to have for their leaders. By extension, you as Artemy are also experiencing this difficulty, this grief, and you must deal with it alongside him. This creates a specific sense of kinship with Artemy as you're going through this shared experience. This is quite similar to how we experience films and books. We feel a sense of empathy for the protagonist as we see the world through their eyes. Though, like most players of Pathologic know or have found out, your sense of self is slowly eroded into the character of Artemy Burakh or the other playable characters through the clever way Iceberg Lodge influences your decisions, mainly through dialogue. I'll be talking about that later specifically, but through moment-to-moment gameplay, we are often awash in blood, and in the struggles of the main character, generally through the fluctuations of the economy, the outrage, as you realise that one day your money is all worthless, and your delightful harvesting of organs. But Icepick Lodge also inserts you into the character of Artemy by making you feel boredom, anxiety, and the day-to-day toll of living in this crumbling society. Artemy's reactions become your own as you respond to looters, plague districts, and the mayhem of the narratives atop narratives to create this very famously meta experience, one in which you are simultaneously a participant, as Artemy, and as someone watching from a more enlightened and modern perspective, such as yourself. I saw myself as Artemy most of the time as I was encouraged by Haruspex Lodge to play a role, both by the theatrical trappings of the game and the way that I had to harvest organs to survive. The gameplay mechanics of the Haruspex become central to the way you see and experience the world, and without those gameplay mechanics, playing as Artemy would feel far less impactful. I know that weighing the moral cost of harvesting organs was reinforced by the game systems of infection, i.e. I need the organs for medicine, the fund, I need the organs for a reward, and resources, actually I can't harvest the organ because my scalpel is about to break, etc. We feel a sense of growing anxiety making these decisions because the game's meta survival system pushes us into thinking like Artemy, a man hounded into making impossible choices by fate. The Ragai Barrow, meaning place of blood, has some significance to Artemy, being the place where the original meaning of the word Haruspex seemed to shine through most strongly. Being this trusted butcher character, Artemy is recruited in the second game to slice open a bull in a ritual of cleansing, and is given a Menku's finger, which symbolizes his, and by extension your, ascent to the title of Menku, which is particularly important to the people of the steppe. A similar event happens in the original game, where Artemy is required to properly sacrifice a bull, which he does, accompanied by worms, sacrificial assistants. There, the two worlds meet in both games. Artemy sacrifices the bull to appease the religion of the kin, and to help come into his position as Haruspex, but he also gets some of the bull's blood so he can help the bachelor make a vaccine or investigate the properties of bull's blood against the plague. The beating heart behind the title of Haruspex is the mystical and religious significance, as in antiquity. Artemy is by no means the most mystical or spiritual of the people of this town. He's not even the most spiritual protagonist, with Clara edging him out in this regard. However, the Haruspex in Roman times was someone that members of the community would often go to for aid in some respect or another. Will my crops grow well? Will my child be happy and healthy? Will I survive childbirth? Will my army see victory? Will I see a good turn or a turn of ill fortune this coming year? And so forth. Officials were known to call in a Haruspex for advice in Roman times, such as the infamous Roman dictator and twice consul Sulla, who always kept a Haruspex with him on his various conquests. This sounds similar to how Alexander Suvorov, Big Vlad, and even the Canes chat with Artemy too, at the very least, discover his beliefs and intentions. Artemy performs these functions to the kin too, just as his father Isidore did. It is said by almost everyone who knew the man that Isidore could be counted upon to provide aid whenever it was required, no matter how harsh the aid might be. Nailing the infected inside their houses and leaving the plague to burn out was cruel, one could argue, but it worked. The plague was destroyed at the cost of people. Artemy is not the same as his father in that respect. His religious and spiritual significance as someone who you go to for aid or assistance is not a negative one, at least not to most people. He seems willing to help any who are worthy of help, even if they are sick and dying of the world's deadliest disease. Think, when in Pathologic 2, the kin comes over to ask Artemy for things. My sister is pregnant, can you help deliver her child, one asks. This demonstrates the growing into the inheritance of his father, which he does at every step of the story as soon as Artemy talks to Aspedy and accepts the pouch or unlocks the chest that his father left him. So the title of Haruspex could be compared to Pillar of the Community, the foundational stone around which all else revolves. Isidore felt like that to the previous generation of townspeople, and now Artemy is this pillar of the community for the next generation of townsfolk, those who he is looking after. Instead of Artemy Burakh the Haruspex, one could call him Artemy Burakh the Pillar of the Steppe. I think that has a rather nice ring to it. The word warden fits Artemy quite well as well. His role in the town isn't just one of support, but also one of enforcement and protection. It was, as I said before, he is a man who is willing to get his hands dirty to protect or to preserve life, even if it is merely his own. But I believe Artemy is a more altruistic individual than merely being a self-serving warden. The word warden is meant to apply to many, a person responsible for the supervision of a particular place or activity, or for enforcing the regulations associated with it. Who better to supervise this particular place, this town bursting, overflowing with such wonderful life, than Artemy, a man born of both worlds, of the vast steppe and the town struggling to cross the River Gorkin to escape from its monolithic past even as much as it embraces it. Specifically, Artemy is a warden toward the people that he chooses to shelter in Pathologic 2. He can be as antagonistic to the people of the town or the steppe as he wants, it is true. There are many opportunities in which he can criticize the philosophies of both sides, but I think the approach that benefits Artemy's character the most is a healthy respect for the two largest ideologies in the game, that is, civilization versus nature. By healthy, I mean a dollop of criticism topping the understanding of both ideologies, but I suspect the ideologies of the games are something I will be delving more deeply into in a future project. For now, we shall simply leave it at its simplest form. Artemy is preserving the cultures of both peoples for as long as he can, but eventually he is forced to choose. There is plenty of evidence throughout the story of him trying to sustain both cultures. The way he looks after the children of all walks of life, whether from the town itself, or living in the polyhedron like Khan, or living in the termitary with the kin as Tyre does. Or when he helps Daniil by performing step rites and making the gruel that he needs to save people from the town. The entire game is, however, building Artemy's choice up at the end. By the end, your sympathies will lie, likely, with more one side than the other. Either the frustratingly bureaucratic or arrogant people of the town, or the backward sacrificial society of the kin, will become the target of a little bit of ire, more likely than not. That's just how the game is written, and that's how Iceberg Lodge want you to feel. The conflict between the townspeople and the kin revolves a lot around how you see the two buildings at the right end of town. There is firstly the gargantuan termitary, which was once known as the apiary. This was probably translated as such to begin with because it looks a lot like a beehive, but the translation was changed to showcase the opinion of the townspeople when looking at the kin, i.e. like termites. They aren't helpful insects like bees, they seem more like an infestation to the more civilized folk. Alternatively, and also, Artemy's bound and known collectively as termites, which is derived from 20th century psychologist Louis Terman's efforts to gather the IQ of children. The highest scoring of those were known as termites. And on the other hand, at the right end of town, there is the abattoir, a building which has serious connotations of bloodshed, of meat and death, of old ancient gods and old ways. It is a place where animals go to be slaughtered and rituals performed. The termitary is a bunkhouse, built for the kin as a cost-efficient way of housing them, after a fire that wiped out a lot of the edge of town, and one in which Alexander Saburov proved himself as a hero, but that's another story. The abattoir, meanwhile, is a building that some townsfolk call very recent, as in built in their lifetimes, but some children say that it is old enough that gods built it, and that those gods may even still live there. The termitary is what we shall call, rather generously, a civilizing force. The claustrophobic confines of the bunkhouse is where the kin now call home, and where many thousands of them die. It is the collar around the throat of a bull to lead it to the slaughter. The abattoir, however, is a place that demands you bow your head to the earth, to the way things used to be. The earth wishes that all humans revert to primal existence, to become animals again, and in doing so, live in supposed harmony. It is the burning of books, houses, and clothes to live in freedom, yet in the cold. How you see the buildings, whether the termitary was a good idea or whether the abattoir's depths have a point, revolves around how Artemy sees the town. He's a blunt man, that is true, and he can criticize both parties as discussed. But the termitary is a place of death, and the abattoir is a place of life. Is dying in the comforts of civilization, away from the miracles of earth, better than living like an animal, surrounded by miracles you cannot possibly hope to ever comprehend? I suppose the definition of miracle revolves around something miraculous, something that does not occur naturally. Perhaps that is how life is meant to be lived. Artemy, and likely you, will be torn between the two viewpoints, but you must decide. The ending of both games contains a choice that Artemy must make. He can no longer be a warden, a supervising shepherd for both ideologies. He must either make the defining choice himself in the original game to topple the impossible tower and thus create a regular town for the children to grow up in, or hand the choice over to someone else, thus shedding himself of the title of warden. In Pathologic 2, the title of warden means even more when considering the ending, primarily as the choice feels a lot more responsive. You can understand and appreciate the sacrifice that you're making even more. The kin, who have acted as selflessly as possible towards you, their Menku, their warden, now ask something of you directly. When they greet you at the exit of the bar, the Broken Heart, They make a concerted effort to convince you, and thus Artemy, of the value of miracles. Miracles, of course, are increasingly hard to come by, but you've also grown attached to the people of the town, the all too human characters, none of whom deserve to die. Toppling the tower, however, means forfeiting an entire people's future. The kin will detach themselves from the town as a separate entity, either die out in the steppe, or will become forged forever into the bloodlines of civilization, into the town. Artemy's title of warden is a weighty one, but the responsibility is another one of the ideals that Icepick Lodge placed very deliberately and carefully into the game. Without your position, not only as a doctor, but as a guardian and upholder of culture, then Artemy's tale would have far less impact. The title of warden is thus crucial to our understanding of Artemy the person. Hello everyone, thanks first for your infinite patience. Hello everyone, thanks first for your infinite patience, and then secondly for watching all the way to the end of the video. I know it's hardly a fancy video, and I wanted to have footage and stuff playing while you were listening, but alas, none of the footage I was happy with. It all consistently made the video worse in my eyes. This is also just the first part of my Artemy analysis. There'll be another part to follow, a little longer than this one, and hopefully even more interesting. But this one was mainly a test to get some feedback and see what I can improve about future videos. I finally had something to put out there, and there we are. Hope you enjoyed. Looking forward to reading constructive criticism in the comments below. And also a quick shameless self-promotion, but I run a blog dedicated to analysing game design, game stories, narratives, and just generally recommending games that you ought to play. I've attached the link in the description below.